A few years ago, I got this mallet from the vintage tool shop, RIP, and I wanted to restore it. And this mallet would later end up being very useful for fixing the headstock on my acoustic guitar. So that's why I have it. That's why I'm making this video here and putting it on this channel. You can see it's pretty old and beat up, and it could have been used as is, to be honest, though, because it's just supposed to be beat up. But, you know, I wanted to clean it up, and here we go. But first I had to get the handle and the head separated. So I took this basswood blank. You can just buy this at almost any craft store that sells basic carving supplies, like Hobby Lobby or Joann's or something like that. And took this flex cut whittling knife and whittled away at it until it fit down in there, and I could basically hammer away on the tip of it to go ahead and get the mallet removed. Now, I live in a single story flat, and we don't have a dedicated workshop space, so I make do with this Black & Decker Workmate 125. I actually like the clamp here, but as you just saw, there are some issues with getting it to hold relatively flat things evenly. So yeah, this basswood blank has been carved just so that I can just hammer it in and pop out the handle. The handle is some sort of, I don't know if it's an oak or an ash or what, some kind of really open grain hardwood that was laved out by the original owner. And I've got the mallet head here. I took off some of the mushrooming with a whittling knife, but I think in the end I actually end up taking off most of it with the hand plane here. This is just a Stanley 404. It's not the best hand plane in the world, and this is also the first time I've ever used a hand plane. So if there's anything I can say, it's that at least I had the blade pretty sharp. I would pick up on a few things here. One, sometimes I just couldn't tell which direction the grain was running consistently, and sometimes that would be, sometimes it just wouldn't be running the way I was thinking it would, and then it'd be easier one way, and then that way that's easier would end up flipping. Yeah, it was a painful process, but having not used a hand plane before, I am glad I at least had the experience to get a feel for how the process should go. And the idea is I just want to take this surface level of crud and plane until we've got nothing but clean bare wood. I figured out eventually that it is better if I'm putting some force that's being transmitted into my workbench to actually have the workbench be braced against something in the direction of that motion. Pretty basic technique, but got a couple of the faces clean like that, and yeah, just kept going. And the faces were also very uneven. There was, I don't know if it was a product of, you know, the faces being bashed, causing the outer faces to cup up more and kind of create a bowl in the middle. But either way, pretty valuable experience. You might be able to see in some of these clips wet spots on the wood. Those aren't spots I miss. I was just sweating. It's pretty gross. And of course, face grain was pretty difficult to deal with, but I was able to deal with a good portion of it, actually, surprisingly. And here you see me just stop and just say, no, I think we're done here. This is, I kind of eventually decided that the faces were probably not worth prettying up too much because they would just be bashed again and again. And I gave a chamfer to all the edges using this hand plane. It was pretty easy to do overall, and just help protect the face from mushrooming a little bit in the future, hopefully, and help those corners from being bashed in. From here, I sanded through the grids. I think it was like 80, 120, 160, 220, or something like that. I sped it up 4 times because that sanding is not the most incredible thing to see. Really help round over those chamfers, and I also went and sanded on the inside to help make sure that the handle would end up fitting into its mortise, and blew it out. And then here, to give myself a preview of what it's going to look like whenever I add oil to it later, I just wiped off the dust with a bit of isopropyl alcohol, which smells absolutely great. It's gross. A couple of bug holes there that I'm going to end up filling later. But this wood just actually was quite pretty underneath, and you'll get to see the finished thing later. But pretty happy with the final look of the mallet in the end. Also, the faces are incredibly smooth. Not too surprising that the parts of the wood that are the most resistant to impact would be so smooth. The handle, I just removed some of the old finish using a cabinet scraper. Not the best technique. You ideally want to be gripping it with both hands to add some tension, but you know, removed the old finish and started working on removing the old wedge, which took quite a bit of work. This Ryoba saw was doing its best. It's actually a pretty good saw that I've worked out some pretty hard stock with before. It's just this particular wedge, I guess, was just really difficult. I tried persuading it with a chisel. I eventually went back to the saw after that. And eventually got through. At least enough for that. Alright, old wedge isn't all the way out, but at least now we have an actual channel. So this is a set of small carving tools from Elemental Tools. They're basically maybe have another few centimeters of metal that sit into the handles, which are mostly just the wood. I pulled out the tiny chisel from that set and started using that because it actually fits in between the slots and could help me with the wood. I haven't actually measured this thing, but I estimated about 5 millimeters, like half a centimeter. It's probably not that small because I'm sure that my finger metrics are a little off these days, but it's pretty small. And then I gave a little chamfer to the tops of the handle, which I knew was going to end up being flush cut off anyway, so it was just to help with getting the wedge in there and hope that process be a little smoother. All right, and with that, the handle is fitting in actually quite nicely. It's actually going all the way to the end of that fatter rounded section as the original turner probably intended. I'm not sure if the handle was taken off, put back on multiple times, or if maybe it was wedged on and then it had a future owner that tried to get the handle off, and then when they tried to put it back on, it didn't go all the way through. But who knows? I would be surprised, actually, thinking on it, if this is the original handle that came with this, that this mallet was made with. So here I actually have a chunk of pecan. I'm going to show the greater chunk that it came from. And I'm just tracing the width of the handle to figure out how much of it I'm going to split off. And I'll just pull out a chisel, probably my biggest Nerex chisel, which needs some sharpening, and my wife's leatherworking mallet that she was oh so gracious enough to let me use, and just split it up. And here it comes, and there it is. So here's the pecan. It's just from a tree near the home I grew up in Louisiana. A lot of the branches had to be cut off, and it's old and on the ground, kind of been left to rot and or be harvested for firewood later, and has lots and lots of bug holes. But it's also got some spalting going on, which really does make it quite surprisingly pretty for pecan, which is, by the way, a type of hickory. So it's actually a really, really hard wood, really dense. So this this section that I split off is going to be put down on the workbench, and I'm going to plane it down to thickness and work it to a taper. This process was a massive pain in the rear. Once it got to a certain point, it wouldn't stick to tape anymore for some reason. So the masking tape super glue trick that has been made famous on YouTube, certainly, I'm sure it was used plenty before that, but that trick just would not work as well. And this 404 smoother, I call it, as I keep calling it, even though it's not the best at smoothing, but it was my only plane that I had set up, and I wanted to get the job done. So it's the one I went with. And this process, I would eventually pull out a planing stop, and I would end up nicking the blade. It wasn't great. Eventually, I would get something that sort of functioned as a wedge, but you know, we'll see how it goes. Here's that masking tape and super glue, and I kind of like this shot actually. Just following the plane, had it braced up, and once I got that wedge cut into a shape where I was more or less saying good enough, here I am gluing it up. I actually tapered it to the point where I could see it was starting to chip at the bottom, and so that was what I went with for the wedge. I probably could have made the thing overall thinner, but there was a lot involved in that, and you know, it's my first wedge, so naturally it broke. But it was too far in at that point, and wedge pretty solid, so I was not about to be coming out. I tried filling in some of these holes with super glue and with some black epoxy, and decided I didn't like any of those, so we'll come back through later. The top, I actually, in all cases, I would end up doing this method where I took this sealing wax, same stuff you would use for like letter sealing. You can buy this sealing wax kit on Amazon if you want to. It comes with a huge variety of different waxes. You pour the wax after heating it up over a little flame, and then you press down on it with whatever wax seal you have. In this case, I'm just using the butt end of this brass wax seal. The brass, I assume it's brass, acts as a heat sink to very quickly cool it down and press it into shape. Now, since I'm just using the butt, it was just kind of a flat nothing rather than having any sort of actual shape or seal to it. And this stuff actually cuts really, really easily. You could probably just go out to whatever hardware store, buy a cheap chisel, and just straight out of the store could probably still cut this stuff. It cut really, really well. At some points while I was doing this, actually, since this chisel actually had some work done to it, so it was flattened, you could see the curls coming up here are actually more white than the color of the wood. That's because it was picking up some of that super glue, but not picking up as much of the wood. So I would end up using this chisel to go through and try to get as much of that super glue off as I could, just using the chisel kind of as a scraper.
Where is the nearest scraper?
Where are you? That's not what I meant to do. Found my scraper though. Doing it that way, it's not proper technique, but it works surprisingly well. And now, after scraping off as much as my patience would allow, I would go ahead and pull out this Japanese style flush trim saw for the top. For some reason, I'm really bad about using the full length of the saw for this, but this helped to remove the bulk of that material, and I could come in later with some sandpaper to help knock down the rough edges and do some of that smoothing work, and also to help take care of some of the excess glue that was around, which, as you can see there was plenty. I actually tried a trick where you add not super glue, wood glue to the gaps and try to sand and have that fill in. Didn't work out so well, but I just come in with my big chisel here and start working pairing that flush with the rest of the area around it. And not to toot my own horn here, but I actually did a pretty good job. The chisel could have been sharper, but the end result, you just have to take my word for it. When you feel it, it actually does feel quite flush with the top. And here I just after feeling the mallet head for a bit and where the handle meets the head, I decided I wanted some flats on here. This was actually inspired partly by Rex Kruger's mallet build, where he copied a vintage mallet, and the flats are actually going along with the faces of the mallet instead of matching up to the sides. But I didn't reference that video right away, so I didn't remember that detail. But basically what I did here was, after sticking this sandpaper to this bit of wood with some double-sided tape, I just used my hand as a fence to feel along, and just use my fingers to feel when it felt right, about when the flat was big enough. So this container has a bit of True Oil. I had a True Oil container where the cap broke, so I put it in these little craft paint containers set aside. And as I'm going through my sanding process, I'm also finishing it. So I'm sanding and finishing at the same time. I'm applying the True Oil with sandpaper. There are these two divots along here that were in the handle before, and there are, of course, all the divots and dings that I didn't get out of the head. But, it was a whole laborious, kind of smelly process of applying this True Oil. True Oil is kind of a combination of boiled linseed oil and some kind of urethane varnish, probably an outdoor one like spar urethane. So I went through, I did this process up with 220 after sanding everything else with grits 80. I think I started at 80 and went through 180 and did that with 220, and then repeated the whole thing with 320. And then a day or two later, I'm coming back and rubbing the whole thing down with steel wool. What I'm looking to do here is even out the luster and feel of everything that's received finish. It received just a regular wiping coat of True Oil after sanding as well. And then after rubbing down and kind of evening out the handle and the mallet faces, I went behind it with this brush to just kind of try to get rid of any steel wool shedding, and that bit of steel wool I shed a lot. And then I just took, on a paper towel, just applied a little bit of this flax oil and wiped it down to help remove any bits of shed that were on that. And also just give it that little bit of extra coat of oil. Flax oil is just unprocessed linseed oil. Arguably, it's probably been processed to some extent to be food safe, but it's just the food safe version of linseed oil that hasn't been through any sort of process to make it a fast drying oil. After wiping it down with that and then wiping off any excess oil, I went ahead and applied this paste wax. I use two different versions here. I use this Carnauba floor wax to hit the face because, I expected, if you're going to wax finish the face, you might as well use the most durable kind of wax you can think of. So this Carnauba wax kind of meant for wood floors. You apply it and then you wipe it down. And just got to say, waxing off Carnauba wax, not very fun. It's very, very difficult. What you're trying to do, though, is you're trying to rub until you don't feel any more resistance, and then you rub some more until you can no longer see changes in the sheen as you rub. It's pretty crazy. But by the end of it all, when you've done it right, it just feels just amazing in the hand, and just has a nice smooth but not low friction is the best way I would describe it. And hopefully this wax coating that I added to it will be nice and durable. And for the handle, I use this just beeswax orange oil Howard Feeden wax. Less durable, but I know that this over a coat of True Oil tends to feel really nice in the hand. I did a similar finish on a guitar neck that I have, and it feels just excellent to play. Just the right amount of friction. Not too grippy, not too slick. So wiping the whole thing down, removing any of the excess wax. You got to wait about 20 minutes for the feed and wax. You wait until the wax is pretty much solidified and gotten misty on the faces, giving it one last rub over before doing the final showing off of the sheen on the camera.